Welcome to Inside Farm Life, your weekly connection to agriculture newsmakers, hot-button industry issues, educational features, and the best in true country music. Now, here's your host, Brent Adams.
Well, welcome to another episode of Inside Farm Life Live, today presented by Massey Ferguson. It's great to have you with us. Our special guest today is Jerry Bohn, the president of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association and a farmer and cattle feeder from Wichita, Kansas. The NCBA convention is coming up next week in Nashville, Tennessee, and we wanted to talk about that as well as some of the latest developments in the cattle industry. And Jerry, welcome to Inside Farm Life Live.
Thanks, Brent. Thanks for having me, and welcome to your audience as we discuss what's going on in the cattle industry.
Well, we sure appreciate the time today. And Jerry, you've been president since February, and you stepped into a role that has been very active and very pivotal at a time in the cattle industry here as the industry continues to navigate through COVID challenges and tries to prepare for the future while tackling some of the big issues such as cattle market transparency and more opportunities for smaller packers, sustainability and tax issues and so forth. First of all, on the COVID front, as you assess the industry from day to day, how has the beef industry rebounded from that initial shock to the supply chain, and what challenges still exist?
You know, Brent, it's really disheartening that we've basically been in black swan events for virtually 2 years. It started with the Holcomb, Kansas Tyson packing plant fire in August of 2019. We just barely get recovered from that, from backing up cattle, and then we get into the coronavirus pandemic where packing plants are only running at about 50% of normal. So during that time, it's estimated that we backed up well over 1 million head of fed cattle that did not get marketed on time. And so then you come back with a pretty tough winter storms there that shut down some plants for a period of time. And then you had the JBS cyber attack that's also shut down plants for a period of time. And so it's been one thing after another, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. Placements on feed have begun to decline. The total cattle herd numbers are also declining. I think like 1.3% decline from 2020 to 2021. So things are beginning to look up. We're still challenged to some degree with getting these packing plants running efficiently because of labor issues. But it looks like we're going to get a little more back in line with the demand, with the supply of packing plant hooks and the fed cattle supply, certainly as time goes on through the rest of this year and into 2022.
Well, just today we learned that Tyson Foods is going to require all of its employees to be vaccinated, including frontline workers, by November 1st. Do you feel like other processors are going to follow suit there?
Typically what happens when one company does it, the others follow suit. And so, you know, they've also all raised salary rates in the last few months, trying to attract additional labor and to keep the people that they have employed fully every week. And so I wouldn't be surprised if the other companies don't follow suit here soon.
Well, the early disruption of the supply chain was tough on the 4 largest meat packers, which buy and process about 85% of the beef in the U.S. It really showed the need for more and smaller, nimble regional packers in the marketplace. Do you believe we'll get to that point over the next few years when there will be more packers across the country?
There is a lot of concern about the bottleneck that we've seen. You know, frankly, we got way out of whack with the packing plant capacity and the available supply of cattle. Part of that created by what we talked about earlier, the COVID crisis. But there is some movement afoot for some additional packing plants to be built. One in North Platte, Nebraska, one in Council Bluffs, Iowa. Also the doubling of a plant in Tama, Iowa by National Beef. But also there's some incentives and some government assistance that is being put in place to encourage some smaller and medium-sized processors to modernize, to possibly get federally inspected so that they can then sell meat across state lines, those kinds of things. And so there's some hope in the future, but unfortunately it just takes time. And I think we saw there was a plan in South Dakota, for example, for a small plant to be opened or to be built, and it was voted out. The people in the community didn't want it. So there are still hurdles to be overcome as we begin to try to grow this packing plant capacity.
Well, last month, President Biden issued an executive order that initiated several federal rulemakings and committed $500 million to expanding processing capacity in the beef industry. And that order directed the USDA to consider issuing new rules under the Packers and Stockyards Act, making it easier for producers to bring claims. In essence, a producer won't have to prove that the action harms an entire industry, but instead just an individual producer. Also, that order directs USDA to develop a plan to increase opportunities for producers to sell their product in a fair, transparent, and competitive marketplace. And that's a big deal because, as we've chronicled here in the past, the major packers are making major profits and producers aren't seeing that trickling down to them despite the increasing cost of doing business.
Yes, that's correct. And I think the $500 billion that they've allocated are designated to assist smaller and regional packing plants to expand and to modernize. I know they're going to be seeking input from the industry about how that money should be spent. So we're looking forward to having input on that and assisting processors and members where we can to utilize some of those funds. And unfortunately, those are a long-term process. You know, it's not something that's going to happen overnight, but hopefully in the next 2 to 3 years, we will see us stay more in balance, supply of fed cattle versus packing plant capacity.
Well, there have been calls for quite some time for the Department of Justice to expedite any investigation they have on the meat packing sector. What is the feedback that you're hearing on that? And are you confident that the DOJ is going to really dig into this disparity between the live cattle prices and the box beef prices and provide some greater insights in the near future?
We have pushed on DOJ to expedite that investigation. You know, it really started after the Holcomb fire. We had kind of an intermediary report from them, but never anything final. And then the COVID crisis hit. So we've been pushing on them really hard to finish that. I can tell you that I do know several individuals and producers across the country that have been interviewed by DOJ. So I would say they're doing more than giving it just a cursory look. But we're anxiously looking forward to some final results from that.
Another key order directs the USDA to consider issuing new rules defining the product of a U.S. label on beef so the consumers know exactly where that product is coming from. And that means processed in the U.S. and not just in a U.S. owned facility somewhere. It may seem like a small thing to some consumers, but that's a really big deal to anybody who makes a living in this industry and wants a level playing field, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And that's a process that NCBA got heavily involved in and really initiated that request to use the processed in the USA label rather than the product of the USA. There's nothing wrong with product of the USA, but it's really a truth in labeling law. And what we were finding was that beef that came from other countries could be unboxed and reboxed, or could be further processed here in the U.S. and get the product USA label put on it. And we also were aware of some products that had a label from imported from another country, but also had product of USA on it. And so it's really tightening up the labeling law. Truth in labeling is what I would call it. And then also someone that wants to use product of USA label yet can do that through a process verified program. USDA has several of those already in place, and it would give producers and consumers better and more truthful information.
Well, and that's one of the key issues right now, isn't it? That what's out there, there's no real tracking of it, so you can't even really quantify what's out there or who's doing what.
Yeah, the labeling, the current product of USA label has nothing to do with origin at all. Like I say, it could come in from another country, be unboxed and reboxed, and put that label on it.
Well, with all this said, how does the NCBA and its members make sure that these directives and this executive order are more than just lip service and actually some action is taken on some of these things?
We work closely with USDA, FSIS, AMS, and all of these issues. And I would tell you that the new administration, when they came in, we were concerned how much input we would have, but they have reached out to our industry, to NCBA specifically. And so we have a seat at the table, and we will continue to push and follow up to make certain that the government's going to do what they say they're going to do.
Well, I tell you what, once again, Waters of the United States has resurfaced, and the America the Beautiful, or 30 by 30, is out there. How do you ensure that this current administration's conservation efforts, are going to take into consideration the interests of ag producers within respect to their own property rights?
The Waters of the U.S. law they just announced this late last week that they're going to revisit that. They're going to revert back to what it was since 1987 and prior to 2015. And then I think what you will see is they have announced that they're going to have numerous listening sessions around the country, different regions, to seek input. And we've been assured by Director Michael Reagan at EPA that agriculture and cattle particularly will have a seat at the table in helping design what this new Waters of U.S. law will look like. I'm certain it won't be as onerous as what the Obama administration put together, and I'm certain that it won't be as good as what we would like from based on what the Trump administration did. So it's going to be something in between. I'd say this is a 2 to 3 to 4 year process before we really know how it will actually end up. But we feel confident that we're going to be able to have some input on that.
Yeah, I know the environment is always a big issue here, and it certainly has been since the outset of this administration. What is the NCBA doing to communicate its message about the environmental stake that its producers have?
We're doing several things. We had a task force that just recently developed some goals in the sustainability and environment arena that we'll be rolling out at our convention. We're also participants in the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, as well as the World Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. And we are also we're going to work really hard to change the narrative. You know, agriculture gets beat up a lot about its contribution to the environment, when in actuality, the EPA of the United States says that the beef industry only contributes 2 to 3% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the country. We're going to talk about the fact that our animal is an upcycler. 90% of the food that it eats is products that are not available or consumable by people, you know, such as grass, forages, crop residues, waste food products, those kinds of things. And get that message out there and let people know that we're contributing to the environment rather than taking away from it. And another fact, too, is that our producers operate close to 900 million acres of land that sequester carbon. And it looks like in the future there's going to be possibly a market for carbon sequestration. So hopefully some of our producers can use that as an additional income stream as we go forward.
Well, tax structure is another key issue here I wanted to touch on briefly. We had American Farm Bureau Federation President Zippy Duval on here last week, and he expressed concerns over the proposed tax hikes, including what many people refer to as the death tax. What needs to be done here to ensure that next generation farmers aren't slapped with such burdensome taxes that it ultimately costs them a farm that's been in their family for generations?
We're going to work really, really hard with the administration to make certain that their quest for money to fund all of the stuff that they want to spend money on doesn't come from our producers. Step up in basis appears to be under consideration. We're going to protect that because it's important that our producers are able to pass on their ranch land and farmland to the next generation. You know, agriculture is obviously, we have a lot of assets, but we rarely have enough cash. And if we have to pay the taxes on the estate tax when someone dies, and we can't pass it on to the next generation. In fact, some of them have had to sell off part of the ranch or farm, or in some cases, nearly all of it, to satisfy the tax man. And so we're going to work really hard to make certain that these tax provisions that we currently enjoy will continue to be available to our producers and cattlemen as we go forward.
And another item I wanted to touch on just briefly here is the flexibility in the hours of service rules for livestock haulers, because this is an issue that just keeps coming back around. I know we've seen a temporary exemption after temporary exemption. This issue just kind of seems to get kicked down the road. Are we ever going to see a day when this issue is going to be completely hammered out once and for all, and there's going to be an acknowledgement that work done by livestock haulers isn't the same as work that's being done by truckers hauling other consumer goods?
But we're continuing to work on that. Allison Riviera in our Washington, D.C. office is shepherding that. We're not going to give up until we get a complete exemption for livestock haulers. You know, less than 1% of the truck accidents that occur across the country are caused by livestock haulers. But it's also, we've got to point out to the Surface Transportation Agency that one size doesn't fit all, that our live animal cannot be standing on a truck for 10 hours while a driver sleeps, or we can't unload it and reload it without harming those animals. And so we continue to push for a permanent exemption. There's been a series of temporary ones. I think the current one expires at the end of September. My expectation is they'll extend it again. But we're not going to give up until we get a permanent exemption. We were successful in getting a 150-mile exemption on the tail end of a haul added to the recent law. So currently what can happen, a driver can drive 11 out of the 14 hours plus the 150-mile exemption on the tail end, and then he has to rest for 10 hours. So we're going to continue to work on that. It's a work in progress, and I think eventually there's a good chance we'll get a permanent exemption for livestock, but not yet.
Well, I tell you what, policy is going to be among the items discussed as the NCBA members convene in Nashville next week for the CattleCon 21, which is the organization's annual convention, August 10th through the 12th at the Gaylord Opryland Resort and Convention Center. More than 9,000 cattlemen and women are expected to attend the show, which is going to cover 7.7 acres. A huge show, huge impact to Nashville. First of all, what can folks expect to see and do when they come to the convention this year?
Well, all of the policy things that we've already discussed here today are going to be on the table, and certainly other things. It's also the meeting where our checkoff partners come in. They start to look at authorization requests for how checkoff dollars can be invested in the next year. So that'll be ongoing. Cattlemen's Beef Board has their annual meeting there. CattleFax has a really good long-term outlook session there. As you've alluded to, we have a really big trade show coming in. Some of it will be inside. Some of the displays will be outside. We've got Kix Brooks is going to be kicking off the convention as the keynote speaker. Jason Brown, a former NFL football player turned farmer in South Carolina. All the produce off of his farm now goes to charities and for people in need. And so he's going to talk about that and the need for people to volunteer and to work with people that need assistance in our communities. So we're looking forward to that. And also we're going to finish up the last night with a Grand Ole Opry show. I think there's 5 or 6 different personalities that will be performing just exclusively for our members and our audience at the Opry. So we've got over 5,100 people registered so far, and we're expecting a large drive-in attendance also. So it should be a really good crowd. And I think everybody's going to be excited to get out and about again. This convention got postponed from February because of COVID. And right as of today, Nashville is fully open, and we're looking forward to having everybody come in and join us.
Well, I know there are a lot of lingering safety concerns about these large gatherings. What's being done there to ensure the safety of attendees?
We'll have sanitation stations set up. We'll have signs asking people to pay attention to, safe distancing. I think masks will be optional. We're not going to, as of now, it's not going to be required, but I'm certain there will be some there who will be wearing them. Hopefully, most of the people that are attending will have been vaccinated also, and so that certainly alleviates a lot of the concern also.
Well, one of the highlights of the convention is going to be a State of the Industry addressed on Wednesday, August 11th. As we wrap up our time today here, President Bohn, what does the state of the industry look like from where you sit?
I think we've gone through some pretty tough, rough times, and certainly as we look forward here in the next several months, things are beginning to improve. Now, one of the sad side notes is it's very dry and hot across the western part of the country, Minnesota, Dakotas, Montana, Idaho, Oregon, Washington, and through the west. So we've got that to deal with. But other than that, feeder cattle and calf prices have been surprisingly strong here in these summer auctions. Fed cattle demand and beef demand is record good. Export business is outstanding. Domestic demand's outstanding. So what we talked about earlier, trying to get this bottleneck at the packing plants resolved, will certainly go a long way in helping our producers. But the outlook here for the next couple of years looks to be pretty exciting. And I think it's really noteworthy that beef demand continues to grow despite the fact that the beef prices are, frankly, fairly high.
And if folks are in the industry but are not currently NCBA members, why should they become a member of this organization?
We work really hard every day running interference, playing defense a lot of the time in Washington, D.C., but we also get some opportunities to play offense. I think this labeling law is an example of that, where we can promote things and introduce legislation that will be beneficial to our members. And so we've got a team of people, about 20 people in Washington, D.C. that are working extremely hard every day, minimizing government regulation, making certain that the regulations that do pass are not harmful to our industry. We have a team in Denver, Colorado that work on the federation side of administering the beef checkoff, making certain that beef demand grows, that nutrition research, beef safety, all of those things are kept front of mind so that consumers can enjoy a really great beef product every day.
Well, again, CattleCon 21 is going to be held August 10th through the 12th at the Gaylord Opryland Resort and Convention Center in Nashville, Tennessee. And you can find out more information about that at convention.ncba.org. And President Bohn, we want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us here today on Inside Farm Life. And we'd love to have you back in the future as we make some progress on some of these key issues.
Thanks, Brent. Thanks for having us. Thank your audience for listening in.
And we want to thank you so much for joining us today. And if you're a traditional country music fan, I'd love to invite you to come back here again today, 7 p.m. Eastern, as Texas singer-songwriter Randy C. Moore is going to join me to talk about his career, his time in Nashville, and a new song he's had recorded by Ronnie Millsap, the legendary performer, and so much more. And you're going to hear some of his great music as well. And again, that's at 7 p.m. today, right here on the Farm Life Facebook page and YouTube channel. Also, if you had a chance to check out the Inside Farm Life podcast yet, each week we bring you agriculture industry newsmakers, hot button industry issues, educational features, and the best in true country music. And you can find that each Friday, the link right here on the Facebook page, or you can subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Deezer, Audible, and Odyssey. We want to say a special thank you again to today's sponsor, Massey Ferguson, which I know also is a supporter of NCBA and their great work. And you can check out the great Massey Ferguson lineup at masseyferguson.com. Also, a special thanks to their parent company, AGCO, which is the presenting sponsor of all Inside Farm Life shows in the month of August. Hope you go and check them out at the end of this month at the Farm Progress Show in Decatur, Illinois, where many of their fine products are going to be on display. We also want to say a special thank you to a couple additional sponsors, Concept Agritech and Gateway Seed. Well, friends and neighbors, the clock on the wall tells us it's about time to get on out of here. So for now, and until 7 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Central, hope you come back and join me again tonight. It's Brent Adams. Come back again, shall we? And bring along a friend.
You've been listening to Inside Farm Life, a production of Farm Life Media. If you have topic suggestions for future episodes, drop us a line at brent@farmlifemedia.com. And be sure to check out our website, farmlifemedia.com.